Okay, so we've talked about analog audio. Now we want to talk about this digital component here. That is basically, in most of our experiences, been inserted inside the analog realm in everything we do at this point. Okay, didn't used to be, but now it is. We no longer record on the tape and use these analog mixers as much. What does this mean when we go to digital? Well, digital gives us, excuse me. Digital gives us one thing and one thing only, and that is infinite replicability. We don't care about anything else. That's all we care about. Well, that seems strange. Why would that be? Let me draw you some pictures and show you why. Okay. Let's say we have a cable here. This is a very long cable. It runs all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, or under it, we'll say. And I send a little signal down that cable that goes bleep, 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 like that. And it goes for many, many miles, and after a few miles, it's kind of only about this high. And I send it down a few more miles, and now it's only that high. I'm halfway across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm starting to get into a little bit of trouble here. So I have to go down in my submarine, and I have to build an amplifier down there to amplify that signal. And when I boost it up, my signal looks a little bit ugly, because the signal-to-noise ratio got really low. All the interference was coming in on that wire and all this stuff. And when I reboosted it, now it's got some noise in it. It doesn't quite look like the original signal, but it's the best I can do. If I move the amplifier closer, then I have to put in more amplifiers, but my signal will be clear. I get to decide. But all that noise that gets mixed in there still gets amplified as well, right? It amplifies everything, not just the sound I want, but all the stuff I don't want as well. Okay. And I send that along, and guess what happens to that one? Oop. So then I amplify it again, and coming out of here, we'll say this is my signal going in. Coming out of here comes this rather ugly thing. This is the analog world, and as you go over distances, eventually it runs out. It doesn't matter if this is cables into the Atlantic Ocean or a television station pumping out its signal across the airwaves. Eventually it's going to run out, and it's just going to be noise, a jumbled mess. Does that make sense? Okay. Digital works like this. Same cable. I send out a on and off, off, on, off, on, like that. We'll use green for digital. So it starts out, it's really good and happy, right? Fills it up pretty good. Starting to get a little weak here. And by the time I get here on, it's very hard to see those ons and offs. What do I put in here? Well, I don't have to put an amplifier in. I can put in, I don't know how to draw a replicator. I'll draw it with two arrows. I'm making that up totally. All it has to do is be able to see if it's an on or off. It doesn't have to know how on it is or how off it is. Just, is it on or off? And if it can just detect that, just above the noise floor, oh, that's on, oh, that's off, it can rebuild the whole darn thing all the way it originally was. And the same thing happens, it gets smaller here again. But then I can amplify it again, or rebuild it, sorry, replicating it. And when I come out here at the end, I can rebuild, because all I needed to do was see where the ons and offs were. I didn't need to know the quality of those ons and offs, just that they were. And I can rebuild the signal, and it looks identical to the way it did when it started. That make sense? That's what digital gives us. Back in the day, if I had to, in the analog world, send an email to Felix, I'd print it on the copier, and I'd give it to Felix. And he's like, oh, thank you. It was called a letter, by the way. That's what we used to use. And if Felix wanted to give Syra a copy of the letter, he'd go make a copy of his copy and give it to Syra. Now, by this time, it's getting a little gray, a little splotch marks on it, but Syra needs to get Alex a copy, so she makes a copy for him, gives it to him. He gives it to Christian. By the time we get to Christian, this piece of paper is starting to look pretty bad. Okay? The quality of it is starting to reduce. It's doing exactly this, right? Because each time you're making the copy of a copy, it's getting worse and worse. That happens with analog tape. That happens with letters. That happens with anything in the real world, right? Digital, I send him an email, and he forwards an email to Syra. He is actually not forwarding my email. He's replicating it, making it a replication, and sending another set of ones and zeros to her. In fact, there is a copy of it in my sent box, in his inbox, and his sent box, and her inbox. We have 4 copies, and they look identical. Nothing's reduced. That's digital. We can do that with sound and audio as well. When you have a loop and you play back that loop a billion times, it's going to sound just as good. When I used to play back my cassette, not just re-recording and bouncing, but actually just playing the cassette over and over, eventually the magnets were turning the iron oxide particles, and it was losing its resolution just by being played, much less a copy of a cassette of a copy of a cassette of a copy of a cassette. Each time it would sound worse, and you could totally hear it. Okay. Not only that, I can store a copy somewhere. So when I drop my CD or I drop my computer over here, I've got a backup on Dropbox, right? Or the cloud. I can have infinite replicability, all sorts of replication of this. I used to, man, if I lost my CD, I had to go buy a whole new CD. I had to buy a whole new CD, right? And now that just seems funny. I just download a copy from iTunes, or I don't even want to have it. I'm just going to get it from Spotify for my $5 a month. And so is Syra, and we could be listening to the same song. We'd have 2 different files, but they would sound exactly like each other, and like the original song. Infinite replicability. So you don't lose any fidelity. Once you've established your initial quality, it stays all the way through the end, and you never lose it forever, as long as you can keep replicating until a nuclear war happens and we all melt or something. You know, we have to kind of destroy the world at this point to lose the data we have. This is why you guys have so much more access to information than my generation ever had when we were your age. It's all on the internet, right? We all go to the same website. We all look at it at once, and the website doesn't go, oh, I'm getting tired. I can't make copies. It's like, sure, spit out a few more. Okay. Questions on that? So how does that work with audio? Well, if initially we have that sound happening in the real world, there's an explosion of sound of some sort, and it has waves that maybe look like this, we will have a microphone that'll pick that up and convert it into voltage, and that voltage will look very similar to the initial wave. It'll look a lot like this. I tried to make it so that these lined up with those waves in the air. So if this acoustic energy gets converted to voltage, this voltage is called an analog. An analog of the real world, because it looks similar to the original real world situation. If I was showing a person's head on television, the analog, or let's say not say television, let's say film. We took a video of them, right? If we looked at the film, we'd look on the film and we'd see this. We'd hold the film and you'd see the person's picture, right? It would look just like them. It isn't the person. It's not really them. It's an analog of them. Okay? This freaked people out a few hundred years ago, right? When people were taking pictures of people, like stealing part of their soul. And some religions still believe that, right? Like in the Middle East, you don't just go take pictures of people. This is the analog realm. What does the digital realm look like? I was doing digital and green, so I'll do digital and green. Digital looks like this. This same person might look like this. It doesn't look anything like them. It's completely abstracted. We've abstracted the information away from the context. Okay? Now we can do stuff with this information and then spit it back. These sound waves now look like that. In fact, looking at this, I couldn't tell you, is that a sound wave? Or is that an image? Or is it an email? I can't even tell. It's a digital representation of it. The computer doesn't even care. The application makes sense of that, right? The application in the computer will take that and convert it into sound or image or whatever it's supposed to do. Okay. But the computer doesn't care. It's just ones and zeros. Yeah, I'll do whatever you want with me. Tell me to add them, sure, I'll add them. Extract them, store them, make a copy, great. Done, right? Okay. How does that happen? Well, there's this thing called pulse code modulation. I'm finally getting to the lecture notes here. Pulse code modulation right here. PCM, you've seen this? You remember where you've seen this? Yeah. When you bounce in Logic. It asks you, do you want M4A or MP3? And one of them says is PCM. What is PCM? You take the analog waveform, and you take a picture of that analog waveform every so often. And for each time you take the picture, you assign the value of the waveform at that point. See as close as I can get there and there. This is called a sample. A sample of the analog waveform, and you assign for each sample a number to it. Okay? Just like a snapshot with the camera, right? Here's what it looked like for that split second. At this split second, it was this loud. In the measurement of the amplitude at that time. And we do it really fast. This is called the sample rate. How fast we take screenshots or snapshots of that sample, not screenshots, snapshots of that voltage sample rate. Can anyone guess what our rate is measured in? Hertz. It's measured in hertz, just like we hear. Okay? And sample rates usually start about twice what our hearing rate is. So does anyone know what the highest frequency we can hear is? How many hertz? 20,000. So can you guess where sample rates would probably start? About 40,000. In fact, they started at 44.1 kilohertz. That's the most common sample rate, or something higher than that. Okay? It's twice what our hearing is, so that it can get all the frequencies that we can hear. Okay? It assigns a certain number to it, and the number of steps that you have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, in this case, are the bits. Bit depth. Bit depth is how much resolution you have from plus 1 volt to negative 1 volt. How many horizontal lines of resolution do you have? It's not how loud it goes, it's how much steps in between you get. And so obviously the more steps you have in between, the more bits you have, the faster you're taking those pictures, the closer it'll be to being exactly like the analog signal. It will never be exactly like it, but it'll be closer as you get to higher resolution. Does that make sense? So you want higher sample rate, you want higher bit depth. Questions on that?
So what would we use the PCM for?
PCM is doing this. So this is happening inside. If we jump back here, this is your analog to digital converter. It is using pulse code modulation to convert your analog signal into digital. From voltages and transverse waves into ones and zeros that look nothing like what we had originally started with. Nothing like it. Ones, zeros. That's an analog to digital converter. A digital to analog converter does the exact same thing in reverse. It takes in snapshots and spits out voltage. Spits out voltage. That make sense? So anytime you're digitizing sound, you're making use of PCM. That's how it's done.
So, but in Logic, if we were to use PCM and then bounce it as a PCM, how would that PCM be?
Okay, so we'll talk about file compression in my next lecture. Okay, by default, when we're using the computers, they're working in PCM audio that's been done like this. When you convert it to MP3 or M4A, you're compressing it further using some algorithms to make it even smaller than this, and ideally try to maintain the same fidelity. Doesn't quite. Good question. All right, so now, what happens, of course, if you look at my orange lines here, you'll see that I was trying to do the orange lines where the blue lines crossed, and that means that my sampled version of this waveform is going to look something like this. It's missing a whole bunch right there. You see that? My orange line is not matching my black line exactly because it's having to round off. I don't have a sample. I don't have a sample right here. That's in between the green lines. I don't have a bit right here. It's in between the blue lines. Does that make sense? Okay. This is called quantization. It takes the waveform and instead of it being smooth and round, starts to make it square. What happens when we start to square off waveforms? Huh?
Like the sound changes.
The sound changes. What does it do? Distortion. It causes distortion. It's called quantization noise. Okay. The signal doesn't sound as good. We start to think that does not sound as warm either. It doesn't sound warm. It starts to sound kind of sterile and cold. Just like with video, when you're watching a movie and it's cold digital, it's because they don't have enough bit depth in it and high enough sample rate. Okay. We've gotten so high now in our sample rates and our bit depths that it starts to sound pretty good and we don't hear the quantization noise, but it is there. It is there. Our ear just doesn't hear it. If the signal, if it gets too loud and we've used up all of our bits, let's say the waveform went way up here, like this. We don't have those bits available. We just hack it off right here. When we hack it off, it's called clipping, complete distortion. Okay. Clipping, quantization is usually smaller distortion. Clipping is when you overload the analog to digital converter. You do not want to overload your analog to digital converter. You get clipping. Not a pretty noise. Questions on that? Feeling good? Okay. CDs, when someone says CD quality, what that usually means is 16 bits of resolution with a snapshot taking every 44,000 times per second, or twice as fast as we can hear. Going twice as fast allows it to get all the way down to 20,000 hertz. Okay. Your sample rate has to be twice the frequency you want to hear. Bit depth, how does that work? Well, if I've got, just do a quick thing on digital here. If I've got a 1-bit system and I got 2 and it's digital, so I have a 1 and a 0, how many possibilities are there for that 1 bit? What values can it, how many values can that 1 bit be? I'm not asking the question well, I feel like. I'll just tell you. That 1 digit or 1 bit could either be a 0 or a 1. So a 1-bit system has how many variables that it can be, or how many values that it can be? 2. Okay. A 2-bit system would have 1, 2 spaces that could be in. How many values can I have there? I could have a 0 in both, right? Both spaces. I could have 0 here and a 0 here, so that would be 0, 0. I could have a 0 and 1 in the other. I could have a 1 in the first one, a 0 in the second one, or I could have 2 1s. So I have 4, right? This is 2 to the first, 2 to the second. If I get up to a 3-bit system now, so I have 3 digits that it can be of either 1 or 0. How many variables do I have here, or values can I have? Nope. 2 to the third is 8. Not 2 times 3, but 2 to the third power. Okay, watch this, because I could have a 0, 0, 0. I could have a 0, 0, 1. I could have a 0, 1, 0. A 0, 1, 1. A 1, 0, 0. A 1, 0, 1. A 1, 1, 0. And a 1, 1, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different values I could have in a 3-bit system. Does that make sense, at least conceptually? It's not like you need to understand every step of it, okay? So when I get up to 2 to the 16th, we had 8 here, we had 4 here. Can anyone tell me what 2 to the 16th is? 2, xy, the 16th. 65,536 steps in between there. So 44-1 at 16-bit 44-1 is I have 44,000 times a second I'm taking a picture, and I can assign a value of anywhere from 0 to 100 or to 65,536. It's a pretty tight grid here and here. When I get up to DVD, it's much tighter. In fact, not only am I taking a picture twice as fast, I'm at 96,000 times a second, but 24-bit now, watch this, 2 to the 24 is 16 million steps in between. So that we're getting very close to being able to map out that wave very smoothly. That makes sense. When we record in Logic, we're usually recording at 24-bit 96K. When we export, we are usually exporting at 16-bit 44.1. When you're listening to it on the internet, it doesn't even sound even close to those. And I was working on the, when I was mixing the wind ensemble, I brought it home and my wife was listening. She's like, that sounds really good. I'm like, well, one of the things is, besides that they're playing well, we had really good microphones and good speakers, and the room sounds good, is that we were playing it back at 24-bit 96, right there, right out of Logic. And when I exported the file as 16-bit, 44.1, 16-bit CD quality and put it up on SoundCloud, even she could hear that it didn't sound as good. And then when we compressed it even further as an M4A, it sounded much worse. Right? Much worse. So the audio quality we actually listen to day day right now is worse than when I was growing up, when we listened to CDs. It sounded better.
DVDs kind of Blu-ray as well?
Blu-ray was a competition with DVD. Yeah, it did not. Neither one lasted very long. The internet just, you could work off the cloud. So Blu-ray idea is similar, comparable in quality. Sound good? Right. I think that's it for digital. Are there questions?